All right, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Our guest today is Grover Norquist. He is the president of Americans for Tax Reform, the very effective anti-tax organization. I don't want to make it sound nefarious or malicious. I've been to plenty of Grover's meetings and have dined with Grover, but a very effective organization. Grover Norquist, welcome back to the news.
Good to be with you.
Well, I wanted to talk to you, obviously, because all of a sudden Joe Biden is talking, or there's talk that Joe Biden is going to raise taxes. I guess let's just start. I'd love your immediate thoughts.
Well, he told us during the campaign, not repeatedly, but he did make it clear what his plans were. They were $4 trillion in higher taxes, $11 trillion in higher spending beyond what was being done. And that he would eliminate the entire Trump tax cuts, the entire Republican 2017 tax cuts completely, that he was interested in energy tax, carbon tax, gas tax on steroids, everything, and that he would double the capital gains tax, that he would take the corporate rate from the 21% it is now up to, he said, the 35%, back to where it was when he was vice president and Obama was president. His staff says 28, but in both cases, those are higher than communist China. He wants to go back to when the United States had one of the highest income tax for corporate income tax in the whole country, higher than Russia, higher than Hungary, higher than everybody. So he said all these things. Now the question is, he may not do everything he said. But so he wants to take the Social Security tax up for so that people who make $1 million are paying Social Security tax on all the money they were making, not just the first $190,000 or so, which would be an incredibly high marginal additional tax rate. So lots of stuff. We'll find out what they decide they want to do and how quickly.
Am I correct that because of reconciliation rules, these are changes he could make with just a simple majority in the Senate?
If the tax bill is done with reconciliation, inside reconciliation, and they have another reconciliation for 22, so that's why I think they're looking at doing the spending spree that'll be not roads. There was a spending spree that wasn't COVID. Now there's going to be one that isn't roads, but it'll be advertised as if it was roads. But now they call it infrastructure, which is a French word, which means everything except roads. When politicians intend to build roads, they'll tell you roads. Sometimes they'll tell you roads and not mean it. When they say infrastructure, they're really highlighting this is not roads, this is not highways, this is everything else. So they'll do the spending spree, part 2, and the tax increase in the same reconciliation package.
And do you have a sense, I mean, there've been, when it came to like raising the minimum wage, senators like Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema wouldn't go along with that, but they did go along with the $1.9 trillion COVID relief / stimulus bill. Do you have a sense whether Democrats would unanimously, they would have to, all 50 Democrats would have to support an infrastructure / tax hike for it to happen?
Yeah, Manchin himself could stop an energy tax because they wouldn't have the votes for it. You could see some, paring back somewhere or adding on. I mean, we added to the COVID bill, the not COVID bill, a ban on states cutting taxes. Manchin put that in because he doesn't like the governor, Governor Justice of West Virginia, and he's planning on phasing out the income tax with additional revenue as it comes in, phasing the income tax out. There are about 9 states looking at doing that, in addition to the 9 states that don't have an income tax now. So Manchin, Manchin can add things or take things off, or any one person can as well. So I think you'll see big spending, which there'll be no debate. There's no problem with it. No Democrat has a problem with spending too much money. There isn't anybody there who goes, oh, that's too much. But at the end they'll do the more spending. They'll do the tax increase. The tax increase is one where somebody could look at the industries or the structure of their cities and go, wait a minute, or their states, let's not do this piece of it. We'll find out. But there's no Republican vote for the tax increase they want. So there won't be a Republican vote for infrastructure. So it'll be a Democrat-only project.
So according to reports, it would be the Biden plan could include raising the corporate tax rate, paring back tax preferences for so-called pass-through businesses such as LLCs, raising the income tax rate. We found out it's not just individuals, it's on families earning more than $400,000, expanding the estate taxes reach, and a higher capital gains tax rate for individuals earning at least $1 million annually. Among these, what's the worst thing here for individuals, or just sort of at the macro level?
Well, start with the corporate income tax. We took it from 35, which was highest in the world, down to 21. When we did that, it did a number of things. One, everybody who pays utility bills, water, electricity, natural gas, saw their utility bills go down, because the corporate income tax on your utility, that federal corporate income tax, is passed through directly to consumers by law under the utility commissions that they have. So when that tax went down and your utility was no longer paying it, then you didn't have to pay it. So there are several billions of dollars in lower utility costs. When you go back up towards 35, maybe to 28, we'll see what AOC wants and what other Democrats want. But I think you'll find that if they say, it's $100 billion for every 1 point, there's going to be a real effort by people to go, why don't we just add 1 point? You said 28, but let's do 29. Let's do 30. And think of all the things we can buy with just 1 point. So there'll be a real push to move that back higher towards 35. So when you raise the corporate income tax, you increase the utility bills for every American. So this idea that Biden is not going to tax anyone who earns less than $400,000 a year, that's out the window when you cut the corporate income tax, because you raise their utility bills directly. In addition, the economists will tell you, and there's a debate whether it's 50% or 100% of the corporate income tax is paid by workers in lower costs, in lower wages. But generally 70% is what they think it's like, what it is. And you saw when we cut the corporate income tax with the Republican tax cut, the median income in the country in 2019 jumped by over 6%, increased by more than 6%. That's more than it went up in all 8 years of Obama. And that's because when you have more cash inside companies, that after tax cash, they invest in capital to make workers more productive, to make everybody worth more, and they end up getting paid more as well. So you saw tens of millions of people get pay increases. Now, the median income is the person in the middle, half make less, half make more. Our friend Bill Gates making another $1 billion doesn't move the median. Moves the average, but doesn't move the median. The median moved up 6.8%. That was an amazing jump in personal income for people. That now then drifts back because you're going to take away that growth in capital per worker that you have. So that's gonna hurt. Capital gains tax. Whenever we've seen the capital gains tax raised, you see less money on capital gains being raised because there's just less of it, and it hurts the economy rather badly. But you saw Obama when asked, whenever we've raised the capital gains tax, it's raised less money and it's hurt the economy. Should we still do it? And Obama said, yes, we should still do it, even though it raises less money and it hurts the economy because you want to punish.
Right. This is income inequality, and it's not, the primary goal is not necessarily taxes or revenue. It's social justice or something.
It is. And you noticed after 50 years of failure with the Great Society, where they said, we now know how to prevent poverty, and we're going to spend $17 trillion curing poverty, and they didn't move the needle. And all the social measures that you use got worse after $17 trillion, which is what Barry Goldwater might have predicted, but not what Johnson thought he was doing. And they did that. Then they shifted with Obama very cleverly. We're now going to focus on income inequality because we don't want to talk about curing poverty because we've spent 50 years looking stupid by claiming we could cure poverty, and it hasn't worked at all. Giving somebody money does not cure poverty. And matter of fact, it leads to all the pathologies that come from poverty because people don't work and because they don't have to because you gave them money. And so after 50 years of failure, the same geniuses now tell us they know how to end income inequality. Well, the good part about fixing income inequality is like the French Revolution. You don't have to make any poor person better off ever, anywhere. And you can still cure income inequality with a recession or French Revolution or massive taxes on higher income people. So they're at least looking like they're being punished. And then you have less income inequality. Now, the whole country's worse off. But again, as Obama said, that's not the point.
Right. Let me ask you, Grover. So you've just argued or illustrated, I don't have data in front of me, but I'm going to take your word, that the Donald Trump cutting the corporate tax rates helped the average American by lowering their utility costs, and also that the corporations who got these tax cuts didn't just pay out, shareholders or whatever, or pocket the money, that they actually reinvested, and that some of that money trickled down has a negative connotation, but some of that money made its way into the pockets of working class folks. My question for you, Grover, is did we as conservatives sell that? Because I don't think that the perception is that these corporate tax cuts actually helped middle class Americans. I think there's a perception that this was a sop to the donor class and to rich Republicans, and that so did we do a good enough job selling this?
No, the answer is no, because you said many people don't understand this at all. And you have to understand that when the bill passed, it wasn't popular because all they knew was what the Washington Post said about it and ABC. Come April, when people saw what it did for them personally, then it became more popular. But it wasn't until like 2019 where you had this tremendous growth in per capita income and in people's wages growing. And it's not that we cut the corporate tax $1 and the corporation took that dollar and gave it to a worker. The corporation, you cut taxes and the corporation took that money and invested it in the business, which made all its workers more productive, which meant you had to pay them more because the guy down the street was also making their workers more productive and paying them more, and your workers would go someplace else if you didn't raise their wages to match their productivity. This is a sustainable pay increase, not a one-time bonus. Here's $1,000. We may not have this next year. This was a sustainable increase, about $4,000 per worker there, median income. That was a very, very important step forward. Now, right after that happened and the numbers started to come out, what did we have? We had COVID, and that masked the success of the tax cut, not completely, but somewhat. And you're seeing it. Whenever a state lightens up, we're off to the races on economic growth. We're going to have tremendous economic growth this year with the warp speed vaccines coming out and being continued to be produced, and simply taking the government's foot off the throat of the economy state by state.
I'm going to transition here into going a little broader, but I don't want to leave the tax hike debate without making sure you had a chance to say everything you want to say about that. So anything else maybe it's the politics or timing or just the impact, anything else you want to say about the tax hikes?
What they're going to do with the capital gains will take it, when you add on state capital gains, to over 50%. This is back to Jimmy Carter territory and malaise. This is a very damaging effort for the economy. Worse, the Treasury Secretary announces Yellen, she's going to get together with all the other countries, and they're going to put a floor under the American tax system. So we can't cut our corporate rates or perhaps even individual rates if the French object. We're going to lock ourselves into France and Germany and Japan, Lord knows China, and put a floor on those taxes. What happened over the last 30 years, 40 years, was we took our corporate rate down with Reagan, down to about 35%. And the rest of the world saw how well we did, and they all went way past us to an average in Europe that's closer to 20%. Hungary at 9, Russia at 13, 15% for Ireland, and we're up at 35, and everybody else is down here going gangbusters. We started moving towards them, and it was tremendously helpful. I talked to the Prince of Monaco, who they have like a 4% income tax, and they said, if you bring that your corporate rate down to 15, we're going to lose businesses out of Monaco because they'd rather be in the United States at 15 than Monaco at 4. But when you guys are up at 35, everybody stays where we are. So it was a tremendous step forward, and they're now going to reverse engineer that progress and put us in bad shape. So that's going to be painful. And you mentioned the increase on small businesses, pass-throughs, people who pay their business taxes through their personal. I mean, they started a small business and they just ran it through their personal income tax, not through a corporate structure. What the Republicans did was try and bring those rates are always higher than the corporate rate or have been, and they wanted to bring it down for small businesses. So they did like a 20% exemption to reduce the penalty on small businesses. And the Democrats said, we're going to take that away right away. And you will see the war on small businesses that COVID highlighted go into the tax structure as well.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that's the one of all these proposed tax increases. The LLC one struck me as maybe the part that Democrats are underestimating. Like, I feel like there's probably a lot of Americans who have small LLCs, even if it's like a side hustle. Do you think are Democrats underappreciating how many people that would impact?
They are, and there are two other hidden targets. One is when you raise the corporate income tax, the after-tax income cash flow for a corporation is reduced because the government takes more of it. And the value of that corporation is reduced because people are investing in the cash flow that comes out of the corporation. So all of the corporate stocks inside your 401k or IRA, and the Democrats are all in their 70s and 80s, and they think that 10% of America is in the stock market because it was in 1965. But 53% of American households have a 401k or an IRA. So you're taking the life savings of 53% of the households and stalling it or bringing it down. When we cut taxes on corporations, the value of people's 401ks and IRAs, stock market went strong up, and it will drift down again, or at least not grow as fast as it would have when you raise those taxes. So you're hitting half of America in their pocketbook, in their retirement pocketbook, in their life savings when you raise the corporate rate. And that's not one. And the other one is not so much a tax issue, but it's the effort to ban side hustles, the gig economy, Uber and Lyft drivers, to say everybody has to be an employee. You cannot be an independent contractor unless you jump through many, many hoops, which we're not going to let you. So they want to make being an independent contractor illegal in most cases. This was done actually in California. The very left of center California legislature passed it. Then citizens got the signatures to repeal that law. And they did. So the same day that Biden carried California, but citizens said, stop being mean to or outlawing independent contractors. We like that. And Biden's position, both before and after, and still is, we're going to crush independent contractors. We're not going to allow that to happen because it's tough to unionize you. And if we're not getting a piece of the action, we don't care about your job.
And the economy can be a lagging indicator, right, of public policy changes sometimes aren't reflected in the economy maybe for years.
Well, but we're not sure what Biden's going to actually do into how bad it's going to get. And right now, the economy is drifting on the fact that drifting upwards a little bit because people know that all we have to do is stop the unnecessary shutdowns that are still continuing, and the economy will get better. Could be much better, but it'll look like a recovery.
That's exactly what I'm getting at, Grover, is, we're going to have all these businesses reopening and we're injecting trillions of dollars into the economy, which will have a stimulative effect, even if it's like a sugar high, even if you don't believe in Keynesian economics, there's going to be a short-term impact. There's going to be a big impact from, the vaccinations that are happening and the reopening. So will that mask the downside of the Biden tax hikes, assuming that they happen, and prevent us from drawing any conclusions that they actually were, nefarious or that they had a negative impact?
I think it'll somewhat mask it, the coming out of the shutdown recession. But at the end of the day, you're talking about half the country being poked in the eye. So we don't have to tell them that the value of their 401k is not where they'd hoped it would be. We don't have to go out and tell the 13 million people in the independent contractor world, and there may be a higher number than that, but it's a significant number, that their job is threatened and attacked. We don't have to tell every small business that they've just had their taxes directly increased by Biden. So this information gets out. You can have a growing economy and still have people very mad at the president and the ruling party. In 1994, 2 years after the Democrats won the House, Senate, and the presidency all together, they lost the House and Senate overwhelmingly, 53 seats in the House taken away from the Democrats. I think 8 seats in the Senate. And the economy was going up, but people were scared of what they were doing on the spending side and irritated somewhat on the tax side. Ditto with 2010. The Democrats lost the House, 63 seats, and I think 6 Senate seats.
And it sounds like you think that because of our free agent nation, people are get on your smartphone and you order tickets on StubHub and you order an Uber and you manage your stock portfolio, that voters or citizens are generally more sophisticated or aware of what the taxes are doing than they might have been a decade ago.
Yes, that, and so many more people are in the stock market, and even with younger people entering the stock market. The interesting polling data that Scott Rasmussen had a while ago was that $5,000 in the stock market made you 20% more Republican, less Democrat on average. And that was true for every single white, black, rich, poor, government worker, private sector worker. Everybody moved more Republican, some more than others, but it was a significant jump. So and as a matter of fact, up through the Reagan years, the increase in the Republican registration tracked with share ownership. So I think as we get more and more people get into share ownership and people see the benefits of a Republican approach versus a Democrat approach, that talks to people. That talks to people who live in suburbs and didn't like the guy with the orange hair. But now they can vote.
Let's talk about the guy with the orange hair. I want to talk about the orange man, but as I segue into that, to sort of set that up, you have a very colorful analogy that you use to describe brand discipline and the Republican Party's brand management as it pertains to taxes. And I think you know what I'm talking about. Instead of me telling the story, why don't you tell the audience?
Sure. When I was younger and thinking about how people, I had a teacher in school saying democracy means nothing. Nobody knows who the state legislator is. It doesn't work. And as I was riding home on the bus from school, I said, what if the Republican Party branded itself as the party that would never raise your taxes? So you knew when you saw the R there that this guy wouldn't raise your taxes because they'd done that and kept their word to it. Then you wouldn't have to know everything about him. And, maybe people can't be expected to know the name of all these local and state legislative people who run. I thought that might get you close to 51%, and then you could campaign on and go out and talk to people to get yourself across the finish line. And what we did with the Taxpayer Protection Pledge, Reagan asked me to set up Americans for Tax Reform to help pass the 1986 bill. And to do that, I created the pledge, which 100 congressmen and 20 senators signed that year. And now it's about 85% of all Republicans, House and Senate, have taken the pledge, and many state legislators and I think 16 governors. And they say, I'm not going to raise taxes. Here's my pledge. It's a public pledge. And that, since the pledge was taken by most Republicans, which was in 1994, after Bush took the pledge and broke it, and then people saw him throw away a perfectly good presidency, He'd successfully helped the Soviet Union collapse without shooting war. He kicked Iraq out of Kuwait without staying for 2 generations. He had a successful president, except for one thing. He said he wasn't going to raise taxes. He lied. He raised taxes. They threw him out. And when people saw that, they said, the pledge matters because everybody knows if I sign the pledge, I'll never break it, because we all watched what happens to people who break it. So the pledge became incredibly stronger after George Herbert Walker Bush lost the presidency because he broke the pledge. Before 94, the Democrats controlled the House and Senate, and going back to 1932, and there were only 4 years where the Republicans had the House and the Senate together, once under Truman, once under Eisenhower. 62 years, 4 years, the Republicans controlled the House and Senate. Since the pledge became a central part of the Republican Party and the majorities have taken the pledge, the Republicans have had the House and the Senate more than half the time. That's the turning point, when the Republican Party became the party that would not raise your taxes and stuck to it under tremendous pressure during Obama. What happened? We became the party that governed more often than not through Congress. So my argument is that we brand ourselves the way Coca-Cola brands itself, and you go to a store, you can pick up a Coca-Cola bottle. You don't have to read the ingredients. You don't have to ask for a taste. At the checkout thing, you take it home. You can drink your Coke knowing that it's going to be Coke because they advertise and they have quality control. But if you got halfway through your Coke and you looked down and there was a rat head in what was left, you wouldn't just say to yourself, I think I'm not going to finish the rest of this Coke. You would wonder whether you buy Coke ever, and you would call your friends and show them the rat in the Coke bottle, and Coke would have a problem. Republicans who vote for tax increases are rat heads in a Coke bottle. They damage the brand, not just for themselves, for everybody else. They confuse small children about the nature of the world. Mom, you said, but I see right there. So holding that brand loyalty and that the quality control, which the pledge has done successfully since 94, has been central to the Republican Party's success. And maintaining that is what Americans for Tax Reform works with people doing. And now winning will be the Republicans and Democrats both take the pledge, and they fight about something else. But right now, it is the issue that divides Republicans and Democrats. There isn't a Republican who'll raise your taxes. There isn't a Democrat who won't raise your taxes in Washington.
Well, and I think it's hard to argue with. Yeah. Well, it's hard to argue with success. I think the pledge has been very effective at enforcing this, brand identity. And whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, you can't argue with success. It has worked. My question for you is, and again, your organization is focused primarily on taxes, but when we look at other things like spending, for example, and debt deficits and government spending, my sense is that in the Trump era, 1/3 of the conservative movement, we used to have the 3-legged stool: fiscal conservatives, social conservatives, national security conservatives. And during the Trump era, it strikes me that we have gotten, as conservatives, have gotten away from concerns about being for limited government, for being for free markets, for worrying about government spending. And if you look at the $1.9 trillion stimulus, yes, Republicans did unanimously vote against it, but they were not able to coherently argue against it. There wasn't a grassroots uprising like we saw during the Tea Party movement. And I suspect some of that is because during the Trump era, Republicans were complicit in spending money like drunken sailors. And again, this isn't your primary, you're not Americans for less spending. But maybe there should be a group like that. Do you think that there's a brand problem for the fiscal conservative movement, generally speaking?
I would argue that the pledge is the necessary but not sufficient condition for dealing with spending. Unless you take taxes off the table, you never cut spending. Cutting spending at the state level, at the local level, at the national level only happens, like the fight we had with Obama. We took $2 trillion away from him because we wouldn't let him have that spending, because we wouldn't let him have the taxes. So And then you had the sequester, which was extremely helpful on reining in spending. Took spending from 24% of GDP down to 20% of GDP. So step one, take taxes off the table. Step two, reform government so it costs less. You never get to step two unless you do step one. So my focus on not raising taxes is also the beginning of the argument and the fight about getting spending under control, which is necessary. Remember, we came within one vote of doing what Reagan recommended back in the early 1970s, block granting Medicaid to the 50 states. It also would have gotten rid of Obamacare because of McCain's peak, because of his self-absorption, and he wanted to be the guy in the newspapers the next day, not Trump's success. He broke his word, which he gave to both the voters of Arizona and to all the other Republicans. I'm going to vote for it. That was something that over 10 years would have saved $1 trillion. Over the next 10 years, $6 trillion, and over the 10 years after that, $7 trillion. So Republicans and Trump was prepared to sign it. We were within inches and thought we had it, except for the betrayal by McCain, of a significant bending down the cost curve. So I give the Republicans and even the Trump administration high marks on that. It was one guy who stopped that and is responsible for, $6 trillion a decade and then more going out being that problematic. So we need a Republican House, Senate, and President without a McCain, and then go back and do that again, because that's a reform that we did with welfare. We block granted it to the states, saved a lot of money, actually got better run, helped more poor people, and didn't lock people into welfare reform. So the only way to deal with spending is to block grant the entitlement programs, the means tested entitlement programs, out to the states, let 50 states compete to provide the best government at the lowest cost. That's the one thing that takes the cost curve down. Otherwise, you can't just do it nickeling and diming because the entitlements are so large.
Right, but I mean, just to play devil's advocate here, Donald Trump, it was people like Paul Ryan who cared deeply about entitlement reform. Donald Trump was against reforming entitlements. And I think that Donald Trump, shifted the worldview of Republicans and of conservatives from things like entitlement reform to a more populist politics. And I think that has consequences. Am I wrong about that?
Well, it's an interesting discussion. I'm less into the big man in history theory that one guy can change it. The modern Republican Party is not the three-legged stool. I grew up being told that. But what does social conservatives, economic conservatives, national defense? What does national defense mean? Does it mean lots of wars or not lots of wars? That's not a thing. Being good on defense. The better way to understand the modern conservative movement is it is a coalition of groups, institutions, and individuals who, on their vote-moving issue, not all issues, on their vote-moving issues, they want to be left alone by the government. Homeschoolers, let me homeschool. Gun owners, Second Amendment people, leave me alone with my Second Amendment rights. Communities of faith, leave me alone to practice my faith and transmit it to my kids as I wish to. Taxpayers, don't raise my taxes. Property owners, don't steal my property. Vapors, I want to quit smoking. I want to vape. Don't tax or regulate vaping. That's a new group. 13 million people elected as a senator. Johnson in Wisconsin, as he said on election day, was elected with a vapor vote. Who knew there was a vapor vote? Whenever the government pokes people, they create a collection of Republicans who don't like being poked. And so if you go around the table, our coalition holds there. What Trump didn't move any of that away or stop that. And the takings coalition is people who think the proper role of government is to take things from some people and give them to others, sometimes money and often them. But the big city political machines, the labor union bosses, the two wings of the dependency movement, people who are locked into welfare dependency and people who make $150,000 a year, managing their dependency and making sure they don't get jobs and become Republicans, and all the coercive utopians who know how to run your life better for you and they don't want you to have plastic bags, and on the Sabbath you have to separate the green glass from the white glass, from the brown glass for the recycling priests, and they invented those toilets that don't flush completely. All the guys around that table are still there. They're none of them ever going to become Republicans. And the Leave Us Alone coalition is never going to switch over to being Democrats. What we can do is hire less government workers and have the government smaller, and then those people go and get a non-government job without a big government pension. Then they're open to the Republican Party. So I think the coalitions are pretty stable. Where you get the disagreements inside the Republican Party is immigration and free trade, both of which are understandably very difficult issues for a lot of people to figure out exactly where their head's at, what they're trying to do. But at the end of the day, the farmers are Republicans, and they're going to want to be more free trade. We're going to go back to a more free trade position, as the Trump tariffs never got us anything. There were supposed to be tariffs to get China to behave. That it didn't work, didn't happen. So we now have to decide, now what do we do?
All right, I want to go full circle and just kind of end with the proposed or the reported tax increases. And just at a pragmatic level, Grover, I'd love to get your sense on the timing of this. You've said that it will likely be tied with a so-called infrastructure bill. When you think this will happen, how likely you think it is that it will happen, and what's the best way? Probably can't stop it, maybe, but how do you mitigate it?
The Democrats can pass anything they can get 50 Senate votes for. So they will pass something. How big, how bad is up to their internal caucus. We have no effect on that whatsoever. And the Democrats have shown that they can get all of their vulnerable Democrats to vote for gun control and for labor union, which grab bag, getting rid of right to work and right to work states. The Democrat senators pretending to be a moderate in Virginia just voted to end right to work in Virginia and in Arizona and all across the country. So they've got their guys marching together in line, and they're going to succeed or fail together. But there aren't any independent votes over there just to speak of. They're going to move as soon as they can on infrastructure and taxes. They want the tax increase as far away from Election Day as possible. Now, our job will be to keep reminding everybody about that. But they're also passing infrastructure the way they did the virus, the supposed pandemic legislation, which had very little to do with the pandemic. That's spending over years into the future. So it's a massive spending way out out 4 years or so and further. So it won't have as much impact right now because they're not going to spend it all right now. Remember when we had the $800 billion stimulus as opposed to $2 trillion stimulus? That didn't do very much for the economy. It was the weakest recovery since World War II. Reagan's, where we reduced spending from where it was going and cut taxes, gave us the strongest recovery since World War II. And Obama's raised taxes spend gave us the weakest. The recovery, snapping back to the Trump Republican economy, that'll look good. But what they do with spending and the taxes will weaken the economy. So that's going to be a challenge for them going into the election.
We're almost out of time. But I just want to ask you about the tax increases. I did a piece years ago at the Daily Caller where I, really delved into it. And it turns out Reagan as president raised taxes 11 times. Now, he did some super important things like cutting the income tax rate dramatically. So his overall Reagan was a net dramatic tax cut, but he did raise taxes 11 times. Let's compare that to the George H.W. Bush situation where he broke his pledge. There's no doubt about it. But he didn't raise income taxes. It was like gas taxes or something.
No, unfortunately, he did. He took the top 28% rate up to about 31.
Oh, did he? Okay. I stand corrected.
Reagan cut corporate rates. Reagan cut income rates. But he was faced with a pre-Reagan Republican Senate for 6 years.
Right.
Bob Dole was out there trying to raise taxes every day. What Reagan did was fought him. Didn't win all the time. Won the one big vote on the tax cut. But individual income taxes and revenue to the government, doubled in the 8 years under Reagan. That's from growth. We had a phenomenal growth, much more than right now, because tax cuts, but also the deregulation, which the Democrats were part of trucking, airlines, and trains. That was huge. Doesn't get talked about a lot, but it was a big part of lowering transportation costs in the United States and dropping the cost of living.
All right, almost out of time, Grover, but I want to give you a chance. Final thoughts or anything you want to plug?
Well, we're going to have a very brutal 2 years, lots of taxes and spending. If the filibuster holds, there won't be permanent damage changing election rules or permanent damage on labor law. And then in 2 years, when you look at the House and the Senate, it's very likely Republicans will take the House back, both because congressional districts, 6 of them are moving into red states. The Republicans redistrict 4 times as many seats as the Democrats do. And there were 4 gerrymandering power grabs by the Democrats: North Carolina, Arizona, Florida, and Missouri, which were all undone in the last set of elections. So they won't be able, that was about 6 seats that they took through gerrymandering. They're going to lose those again.
All right. Always good to talk with you, Grover Norquist. Thank you for coming back on the news.